Global War 36 enthusiast here with a video about understanding Maritime Air Patrol. Maritime Air Patrol is a form of combat movement for aircraft. An aircraft on map moves into a sea zone and can remain there until it chooses to end its patrol. So let's look at this seaplane. The seaplane could fly out and be on map right here in A20, okay? Until it chooses to end its patrol. But let's look at the difference between Maritime Air Patrol and scrambling. That's the first thing I want to distinguish. Maritime Air Patrol is not scrambling. Let's say it's a British turn. They come into this sea zone, A21. They want to attack that sub and torpedo boat destroyer, okay? And the Germans have an air base here in Normandy, and they've got a fighter, and they decide to scramble this fighter out. This is occurring during your opponent's combat phase, because that's when scrambling occurs, during your opponent's combat phase. And after this combat, then this fighter goes back to its airbase, all right? Whereas Maritime Air Patrol is occurring on your turn during the combat movement phase, not the combat phase. Combat movement phase, you're deciding to fly out, all right? And you can decide if you want to stay on Maritime Air Patrol, or if during non-combat, you just want to fly your map range back and come off Maritime Air Patrol. So let's talk about what your range is, because that's a little bit different. This tactical bomber could just fly 1-2 out to here, or if it's a British tactical bomber, it could go 1-2 out to this sea zone, but it wouldn't be on map, because map range is different than your normal aircraft range. The range of this aircraft, this tactical bomber, is 5, because there's an air base here, so it has 4 plus 1, it's 5. But its maritime range for several of these units is only 1. Let's talk about the 5 aircraft that can go on map. Fighters, jet fighters, tactical bombers, medium bombers, and seaplanes. So that means strategic bombers, heavy strategic bombers, and air transports, they can't even go on map, okay? Only these 5 types of aircraft can go on map. And the map range for fighters, jet fighters, tactical bombers is 1. For medium bombers, it's 1 unless you have long-range aircraft. If you've developed long-range aircraft technology, then medium bombers have a map range of 2. So it could go 1-2 and go on map in this sea zone if you had that technology. For seaplanes, their range is 2 by default, unless you have both long-range aircraft and a seaplane base. You have to have both of those for a seaplane to have a range of 3, 1, 2, 3. Then it could go on map 3 away. So that's your range with map. It's much more limited. And the reason to think about that is when you're on Maritime Air Patrol, you're patrolling a large section of sea. So you're consuming a lot of fuel. So you don't have as much range as you do to fly normally. That's how you have to think about map. So why would you go on map? The number one reason is hunting submarines. When you go on, normally submarines can decline combat. So defending submarines may decline combat unless the attacker has an aircraft on map. Aircraft on map can be paired 1-to-1 with destroyers to attack coastal submarines and normal submarines. So you could bring a destroyer into this sea zone and pair it with this aircraft on map, and they both get a crack at the submarine. Submarines can't hit back at aircraft, so if you do decide to bring a destroyer in, the submarine has a chance to hit you, of course, but you have a greater chance of sinking it. That's the number one reason why you're going to bring aircraft out on map. And usually the most common pattern is you'll fly out on map, you'll take your shot at the sub, and then you fly back home. All right? Another reason, though, that you might go out on map is convoy raiding. There are 3 types of aircraft that can convoy raid: tactical bombers, medium bombers, and seaplanes. All other aircraft can't do convoy raiding. So you would fly out your map range. For these 2, it's 1 unless the Germans had developed long-range aircraft. And for this guy, it's 2 unless he has a seaplane base and long-range aircraft. So you fly out, say 1 with this tactical bomber, this guy's here, and you convoy raid in this sea zone. Note that you may not do that if the enemy already has an aircraft on map. So if there's a British seaplane flying in this sea zone, this guy cannot come out and do convoy raiding. But as long as there's not an aircraft on map, the most common kind we'll talk about later will be a carrier aircraft. That's what's going to prevent you. You could come out and do convoy raiding, and you get a +1 to your attacker's roll for damage. Note that if there's escorting ships present in the sea zone, if someone puts a ship on escort duty in that sea zone where you're doing convoy raiding with your map, then the escorting ships do get to fire at the raiding aircraft with a single defensive roll for each escort ship. If you have Anti-submarine Warfare, ASW, if you develop that tech, let's say the British have developed that tech does not let you have a free shot at aircraft. That only works against submarines. But it does give you the +1 to defend your line against the map, so it'd be a flat one there. Okay, so those are really the two main reasons, and usually what happens if you are doing convoy raiding, you fly out, you hit, and you go back. How do you go off map? Flying off of map always occurs during non-combat movement. So let's say that this seaplane goes out on map during combat movement phase, then it conducts whatever it's doing, attacking its sub or whatever, and then it has to choose to go back during the non-combat movement phase. If you stay out, let's put him right here because that's 2 away. If he elects to stay out on Maritime Air Patrol, there are certain risks. The first thing is you're kind of pinned, because let's say that you try to hit this sub and you don't land. You stay out on Maritime Air Patrol, and then this sub moves over here. Now, the next turn, you would need to fly map during the combat movement phase, but you're not allowed to go from being on map in this sea zone to just flying over one space and being on map in this sea zone. To end this patrol, you have to go back during non-combat movement phase. So if you elect to stay out, you're kind of pinned in that spot. There's an exception that we'll talk about, carriers, in a little while, but you're kind of pinned in that spot. So normally people go out and then they come back. Another reason that it's kind of risky to remain out on map is, let's use an example of a different aircraft. This tactical is out on map in Sea Zone A21. Well, the only adjacent land that's 1 away, his map range, is southern England. If the Germans were to take southern England, they possessed southern England, then if you don't have anywhere that's within your map range to land, you're immediately eliminated. All aircraft is automatically eliminated if it's ever more than its map range away from an available landing spot. So you kind of pin yourself, you make yourself more vulnerable if someone should take your landing spot. But there's another thing too. Map is vulnerable to aircraft, enemy aircraft. This enemy, all these planes could fly out, well, I don't know about the seaplane, but these 3 could fly out and hit that tactical bomber on their turn, and this guy cannot decline. He can decline if the Germans move this torpedo boat destroyer into that. He can choose to attack it. This defending map could choose to attack a surface naval ship that came in, or could choose to decline to attack it if the map player wanted to. But against opposing aircraft, you cannot choose to decline. So that really makes people leery about leaving aircraft out on map. So the question is, why would you have an aircraft be out on map? Well, the first reason why is to kind of snipe at any subs that want to pass through. Let's say the Germans are building a submarine per turn in Western Germany, and they're sending it out through the English Channel. If the British have an aircraft that's on map here in A21, when the German player moves a submarine into this sea zone, then the map player can elect to attack it. They'd get 1 shot. If there was a destroyer present, they could pair 1-to-1 and take a shot. If it was an advanced submarine, remember, you can't do the pairing with the destroyer. It would just be the map aircraft taking a shot at it. A more likely scenario is that you have this carrier task force here, where if you look at this force, it's got a light carrier with a tactical bomber, 5 heavy cruisers, and a destroyer. If this sub tries to move through here, when it enters this sea zone, the map player can say, yep, I want to take a shot at you as you pass by, and it would get a shot with this tactical bomber, and if the map player so elected, could add in the destroyer. This is a, benefit analysis, a cost-benefit analysis. If I add the destroyer, I have an extra 1/3 chance of hitting the sub, but he has a 25% chance of killing my destroyer. So that's one reason, is to try to shoot at subs that move by. That's one reason why you might stay out on map. Another reason why is because when there's an aircraft on map in a sea zone that has a convoy line, if convoy raiding occurred against this convoy line, map aircraft grant you a +2 to the defense of that convoy line. And that's important because the map adds a +1, map on defense adds a +2. So raiding convoy map is +1 to the attacker, defending convoy map is +2 to the defender. And this is going to be a common scenario because you're going to have British light carriers that have aircraft on them. And when you have a defending aircraft with a defending carrier with an aircraft on it, it's automatically considered to be on map. So any aircraft carriers, their aircraft is automatically on map. So if you're a sub, you probably don't want to go after a convoy line. When you enter the sea zone to do convoy raiding where the carrier is, boom, the aircraft and possibly a paired destroyer can hit you. And then when you do the convoy raiding, if you chose to do that there, then the aircraft is going to give a +2 to the defense. So keeping this in mind, if you're Great Britain, your light carriers are really important task forces for defending your convoy lines. There's another little trick. Let's say that the British task force with the carrier is right here, and they, on their turn, they do, during convoy movement, they move this tactical bomber into A27, and they take a shot at this advanced submarine. Then during non-combat movement, all the ships move to, say, A20. Let's say that this coastal sub was there. So we started here, we're 2 away from that coastal sub, okay? We fly 1, take our shot during combat phase. During non-combat, we move the ships there, and this plane that was here on map lands on the carrier, okay? This is called the MAP Leapfrog, because you kind of got 2 spaces. You were able to, instead of moving 1 forward and 1 back, you move 1 forward and then another 1 forward. This is another thing to look for when you're playing. Get your carrier on top of coastal subs. Coastal subs can only move 1 unless there's a sub base adjacent to them. But if coastal subs are out, you want to put your carrier right on top of it. The reason why you want to do that is on the next turn, this sub can only move 1 space. And no matter where he goes, if he goes here, your plane can hit him and then move again and land. So you should be able to, in the early part of the war, if you're Great Britain, you should be able to hunt coastal subs pretty easily because they just don't have the speed to get away. And so that's the leapfrog technique that you would do. Another thing about remaining out on map or having aircraft on carriers that are always on map when they're in the as a defender role is that surface ships may not do non-combat movement into a sea zone that has enemy aircraft on map. So if the British have aircraft out on map here, then you can't do non-combat movement of surface ships through that. Does that make sense? Another thing is you can't do strategic naval movement through a sea zone that has an aircraft on map. Another thing is that supply paths and lend-lease deliveries can be interdicted if they pass through a sea zone that contains aircraft on map of a nation at war with the sending nation, of course. So there are some benefits, but there's some vulnerabilities. You're vulnerable to aircraft, you're vulnerable to losing your landing spot. So often you don't see it except for carriers. That's where you'll normally see aircraft staying out on map. Let's talk about defending aircraft that are on map. On enemy player turns, an aircraft on map may engage enemy units entering its sea zone. So if units enter the sea zone, you can choose, like subs, you could choose. If this torpedo boat destroyer decided to go into that force, you can. Or if there was just a seaplane here with a defensive one in A20 and the torpedo boat destroyer moved in, the British player could choose not to engage, saying, I don't like those odds, I'm not gonna engage you. But if the enemy has aircraft, then you can't choose that, then you get pounced on. If you are on map and you don't choose to engage, you allow them to keep moving. And you can stay out on map like this indefinitely, as long as a suitable landing spot is within range. Let's talk about some special rules to note about map. Some rules that maybe those of you who are really patient and watch this whole thing, some little Easter eggs for you. So, defending submarines may choose to only take casualties from hits by aircraft on map. Let's say that this task force started here, and this tactical bomber went 1, 2, 3, and it was attacking here. It is not on map, right? Because it's outside its map range. It's just flying there. And then these forces, they risk it through the coastal sub. They move into here and say, do you want to fight me? And the coastal sub says, no thanks, I don't want any part of that. 2, 3. So they move over to here, okay? So now the tactical bomber has a suitable landing spot, but it doesn't count as being on map. It's only on map on a carrier in the defender's role, okay? So right now it's not on map. That's a little quirk. But otherwise carriers would be too powerful. It'd be on map all the time. So right now, all these units are here, but there's no map. That means you cannot target that sub unless the German player wants the sub to be targeted. So defending submarines may choose to only take casualties from hits by aircraft on map that are potentially paired with a destroyer. So since there's no map in this particular scenario, that means that the German player, the British get all these hits from the heavy cruisers, but they can only take one hit, the one hit against a torpedo boat destroyer. The sub could just say, you know what, I'm not gonna let you hit me. If the German player wanted to sustain the hit on the sub, maybe he only got one hit and he wanted to keep fighting, he could choose to do so, but he doesn't have to. After the first round of combat, all defending subs have to submerge. Another quirk about MAP is that anti-submarine warfare technology gives seaplanes a +2. Seaplanes that are on map a +2 against submarines. So that ASW really makes seaplanes really effective sub-hunters, which they actually were in World War II towards the end. And then Maritime Air Patrol in any sea zone that's touching a narrow crossing, for example, A22, there's the Straits of Dover that go from Picardy to London, and if you had an aircraft on map in this sea zone, it would stop, it would prevent both combat and non-combat movement across a narrow crossing. So your enemy couldn't move stuff. The Germans couldn't put Marines from Picardy over to London. And then finally, let's say that this was French. Let's move this out of the way. This is a French territory. Let's get a French, we don't need a French rondelle. There we go. Okay, if you take that medium bomber and you fly it out on map before the fall of France, and then the Germans conquer France and France surrenders, the first thing that happens is you look at any aircraft that's on map. Did they just lose their landing spot? For example, if this medium bomber were an A29 on map and France surrendered, there's no legal landing spot for this French medium bomber and it's instantly destroyed. But if you had it within range of a legal landing spot, then when France surrendered, this automatically goes free French. Any aircraft that's on map goes free French. So that's a little interesting nugget to know. I know that map is the most frequently requested topic for my understanding series. I tried to do an exhaustive coverage of it. If there's any questions that you still have about map, please put it in the description or in the comments and I'll respond and let me know